I'm Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. As educators, we tend to focus on the pedagogical issues surrounding education. What's the best way to teach reading? What are the best practices for teaching math? But the pedagogical is often political. Education today is engulfed in political issues, many of them divisive and contentious. They concern how schools are funded, how we address diversity, equity, and access, and the social and economic contexts that affect K-12 and post-secondary education. Today, EdCast examines the racial politics of education through the experiences and expertise of two CUNY leaders: a professor whose scholarship focuses on the Black American Civil Rights Movement, and the CUNY Senior Vice Chancellor for Institutional Affairs and Special Counsel. Their stories and knowledge expand our understanding of the many political forces buffeting education today. Coming up now on EdCast. Joining me today are Glenda Grace and Christopher Burrell. Glenda Grace is the CUNY Senior Vice Chancellor for Institutional Affairs, Strategic Advancement, and Special Counsel, where she advises the Chancellor and oversees and coordinates governmental issues and development. She brings years of legal expertise and a wide knowledge of social justice reform to this position. After clerking in the South, Ms. Grace was a litigation associate in the law firm of Paul, Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison. She also served as a special counsel for the New York State Capitol Defender Office. She was executive counsel to the president of Ostos Community College and later served as general counsel and chief of staff at Queens College. Ms. Grace has served on several boards and is an active member of the Union Baptist Church in Hempstead, New York, where she teaches Sunday school. She holds 2 bachelor's degrees in psychology and economics and a law degree from Columbia University. Christopher Brian Burrell is Associate Professor of History at Hostos Community College. His scholarship focuses on the Black American Civil Rights Movement in New York City. He has contributed chapters to The Strange Careers of the Jim Crow North, Segregation and Struggle Outside of the South, on racial inequities in New York City public schools. He is published in the Western Journal of Black Studies, Public Seminar, and the Gotham Center blog for New York City history. His forthcoming chapter titled Towards Real United States Patriotism, Black American Centrality to the Pursuit of a Multiracial Democracy, will be included in Fighting for the Soul of a Nation, Black American Struggle to Keep American Democracy Alive. He is also currently working on a study of New York City's civil rights movement. Dr. Burrell is a proud Harlem native now living in the Bronx. Thank you both so much for joining me today. I must say that I realized the importance of a conversation on the racial politics of education when Glenda came to Hostos and Kris interviewed you about this very topic, and I realized it's really something that we should be talking about on EdCast as well. So I want to begin with a question, Glenda, that Kris asked you that day, and that is, when you hear the phrase racial politics in education, what does that mean to you?
Well, one of the things that's really important, well, first, thank you for having us
My
to have this
pleasure to have you.
conversation, and really appreciate it. When I hear racial politics in education, it's almost status quo. I think sometimes when people talk about racial politics, they act as if this is a new, that the idea of race is entering the realm of education, like that's something new. And realistically, when you look at the history of America, racial politics, racial policy, racial segregation has been forefront when you're talking about education. Brown versus Board of Education was 70 years ago. And after decades-long fight to get that, to get separate but equal overturned, people resisted it. It wasn't like, wow, this is natural. Wow, we finally made it to the promised land. Let's move on. People shut down schools for years. People resisted. And now we see resistance continuing. So for me, racial politics of education it's the politics of education. Okay. There is no education in New York State in the United States without talking about race.
Okay. Kris, you have anything to add to that? Or
Well, other than the fact that I agree very much with what Glenda just said, I mean, that anniversary of the Brown decision is going to be on Friday, right? May 17th, 1954. And of course, we can go back even further than that, right, to the Reconstruction era when the first public school systems were being established across the South. They were being done largely due to the efforts of, Black legislators who were just entering into, state governments for the first time after the Civil War. And so, although those politics have continued to, I think, expand, right, as our society has continued to become, more multiracial and also, a recognition of the multiracial character of our country, it is certainly not a new discussion, even if it has perhaps some renewed intensity at this moment.
Well, your life experiences speak very much to racial politics in education, for the good and the bad, I guess. So let's talk a little bit about, Glenda, your early schooling was a child in the South, correct?
No, actually,
no.
I'm actually, I like to say I'm northern bred, southern raised.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that.
Both my parents were part of the last part of the Great Migration.
Okay.
They came up to New York State in the late 1950s. My mother came from Alabama. She graduated from high school. She kind of got on a bus to become a mother's helper to a family in Hicksville, Long Island. And she came to make money to go to college. And because of some family situations, her mother dying, she wasn't able to do that. My father, he came up to visit his brother with his whole family. They drove up from Florida. My father interviewed for a job, realized how much money you could make up here, drove the family back down to Florida, got on a bus, and never went back.
Really?
And so they came to New York to just experience a different life, they knew the opportunities for education were very different here and wider, and that's why they came here. And so because they came to New York for that, my sister and I were expected to go to college, even though my parents did not. My mother wanted to go to college. My father didn't finish high school because of various situations, but they knew that was part of the way to make it in America. And so they stressed that was important for us to do. And they were fortunate enough also to find enough money to buy a house in a school district on Long Island that was going to give my sister and I the opportunities that we needed.
So your early education was in Long Island?
Yep.
Then? Okay. Now you did work as a clerk for a federal judge in the South.
Yes.
Tell us a little about that.
Well, after law school, I thought it would be a really good experience to live outside the Northeast. I had family in Alabama. I still had family in Alabama then. And I thought it'd be great to go live there for a year. And I went to interview. I stayed with a great uncle. I stayed with my grandfather. And when the time came to tell my parents I was going to go live in Birmingham, Alabama for a year, they were like, why? And I said, well, I was interviewing. And I said, don't you think it's important to live outside of the Northeast? And my parents said, no. And that's because they had a very different experience when they were in the South. And so it was a great experience in a lot of ways. I had to know my family in a lot of different ways. But I got to see, I expected it to be racist, and it was. I didn't expect it to be sexist.
No, you didn't?
Well, because I mainly looked at the South through the lens of race. And that was there. People treated my judge differently. People wouldn't always stand up when he came into the courtroom.
So he was a black federal judge?
First black federal judge appointed since Reconstruction.
Wow.
UW Clement in the Middle District of Alabama. And some people wouldn't stand up when he came into the room.
Wow.
And I saw them stand up in other people's courtrooms.
Of course.
Some of the cases I learned about were crazy. An ice cream factory where all the jobs where people were in freezers were black folks or Latino folks. It was pretty amazing in a lot of ways. But on the other hand, my judge overlooked Kelly Ingram Park, where the dogs were put with children, and so he overlooked his office overlooked Kelly Ingram Park and 16th Street Baptist Church. So 16th Avenue.
16th Street.
Thank you. 16th Street. I should remember that. And so it was really interesting to see progress and and how far we still need to come.
Absolutely. So, Kris, let me go to you and your education. Tell us a little about your education.
I went to the local elementary school closest to where I lived, PS 200, which is still there. And I was in the gifted and talented program, which is I guess sort of a politics unto itself. Although
it is.
You're not aware of that, as a first grader. But I was in that program all the way through elementary school, and so I largely went to school with the same, or it was in class with the same 27, 28 students most of my elementary school career. There were always a few different, either leave or come in, but we were a cohort that largely stayed together.
Where was your school?
In Harlem, 150th Street and 7th Avenue, I guess also known as Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard.
I know quite well, right.
And it was a very different educational experience than what I believe the majority of students experienced at that elementary school.
Because you're in the G&T program.
Because we were in the G&T program.
Yeah, I know the G&T programs are controversial, and but that said, when students are in those programs, they very often benefit tremendously. So I would like to ask you a little bit about that experience. What was that experience like?
We definitely benefited from that. From that experience.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And and educationally, in large part, not only because of the quality of teachers that we had, but also because for those students, they thought about education in a bit more comprehensive way. So it wasn't just about what was done in the classroom in terms of academic preparedness, but also allowing us to have a wider variety of experiences, being able to, cook lunch in your class once a month, or being able to take field trips that some of the other classes weren't able to do. Okay. And frankly, in some cases, getting away with things that other students would not have been able to get away with. So there was all of that. Although my secondary and high school experience was very different, and I think even more enriching.
And that was ways. What? Just quickly, that was
Central Park East Secondary School. Yeah.
Deborah Meyer,
yes.
Very progressive educator.
Yes.
So you both had very rich educational experiences, and of course the next question is, how does that inform what you do right now? Glenda, I'm going to go back to you with all those experiences, having your family roots in the South, working in the South, educated in the North. How has this had an impact on the work that you're doing right now in CUNY?
Well, I think it makes me understand that there are lots of different ways that people learn, and there's lots of different ways to measure brilliance. And school doesn't always do that if you're not careful. Right. One of the things that struck me is I had my mother and father both big families. My mother's one of 13, my father's one of 8. When my oldest aunt passed away, one of the most brilliant businesswomen I knew, the school that she went to was Second Baptist Church School. She didn't go to a public school because there wasn't a public school for Black folks. And so for me, I'm just excited to be in a space where we can give opportunities to everyone and really help them find their strength. And when I've had cousins in different parts of the country, I had a cousin in Florida who was having a lot of issues, and I remember saying to the then president, now chancellor, I said, my cousin needs an Ostos. He needs a space where he can find himself, get the support he needs, get a cohort of people who are going in the same direction so that he can meet his potential. So for me, my experiences helped me see that there's so many people out there who didn't have the benefit of we called it the more able learner in elementary school, and we called it talented and gifted in junior high school. They didn't have that opportunity, not because they weren't smart, but because people don't mainstream those practices. They're just limited to a small number of people.
Now, Kris, I want to go back to you. Working in Hostos, being a professor in CUNY, do you feel in some way that is mitigating some of the racial politics in education?
Just being on the faculty at Hostos?
Well, no, I mean just the CUNY higher ed opportunity.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Hostos is, one of the most diverse campuses in every way imaginable. in a university system that is one of the most diverse in every way imaginable.
Right.
And so the access that CUNY schools and OSTOS in particular provide for just adults and increasingly younger people through our College Now and other access programs for high school students.
Right.
Absolutely is mitigating some of those responsibilities. And at OSTOS in particular, I think being taught by such an incredibly diverse faculty as well, because that's often in many schools the part that's missing. So people see themselves not only amongst their fellow students, but amongst the faculty and staff as well.
Now, we always often look to the law to ameliorate certain prejudices, but we've certainly found out in life that that is not always the case. In terms of education, Glenda, with your legal background, how do you see legislation affecting education for minority children?
Look, I think legislation can help, right? But it's legislation and hearts and desire and people understanding it's important. So I think it's important to have legislation. I think it's important to think about what the school funding formula looks like. That's incredibly important. But I also think people really have to, we have to reckon a bit with our history. And part of the reckoning is understanding, why are certain people in the country undereducated? Why is it when you get to more elite spaces, it gets wider and wider? And if you don't believe that Black and brown folks are inferior, then something else has to be going on. And the way you fix that is legislation, hearts and minds, funding, opportunity. So I hope I kind of addressed your question.
Now, I don't have to emphasize that these are divisive times in education, and states are challenging diversity, equity, and inclusion practices and legislation, and school boards and parents are saying they want to have a say. So let's go right down to it and look at critical race theory. Now, we did a show on EdCast about it, but I think it's doesn't hurt to revisit it. So, Kris, can you tell us what is critical race theory and why has it been so attacked and why such divisive rhetoric surrounding it?
Well, it is, an academic and legal theory that seeks to talk about and analyze how the law has impacted race, the structural racism embedded in the law. Developed in the 1970s and 80s. It has proliferated, throughout law schools and some other, graduate and to a smaller degree, undergraduate programs.
Is it taught in lower school to young children,
Not in any direct fashion, no. And yeah, that was a talking point that has been utilized in the last few years in order to try and gin up animosity.
No, okay. So what does it say that you think people react so strongly to? I mean, I know, but can you tell us, what is the basic premise or theory behind critical race theory that is getting people so outraged?
Well, I mean, it is about attacking people who want to uncover and educate about structural racism in our society, right? Trying to sideline those discussions about obviously American history, broadly defined, but also the continuing salience of race in our current politics and in our economy and really every aspect of American society.
Don't you think it's purposely misconstrued? I mean, I guess that's my opinion, but I mean, it is so misrepresented by politicians that my feeling is that it can't be that hard for them to understand what it is.
Well, I think they understand what it is because it's almost a reckoning, right? You're looking at history through the lens of race, also like you would let through gender or through different lenses, right? That's the critical nature of it. And it's hard not to be somewhat disturbed by what you see, right, or what you hear. But again, it's our history. I jokingly say I live on the Upper West Side, but I'm on Long Island all the time. And the other day I drive by in Levittown all the time. And when I'm in Levittown, I always think, wow, Black people couldn't buy these houses.
Right.
GIs could not get the benefit of these houses. And then I think that's just, and these GIs were my parents or my uncles and aunts. And that makes a difference, right? So you bought a house in the 40s or 50s or 60s versus the 70s, 80s, or 90s. That's generational wealth. And that's, that can be challenging to people. And I think that's exactly some of the things people don't want to recognize.
Yeah.
So why is it so important to teach the history of the United States as it is? And right now, what are some of the debates about that?
Well, just building on the point Glenda just made, it's important for people to understand that the reason why African American GIs, for example, couldn't buy homes in Levitt towns, and the fact that there were multiple Levitt towns all over the country, was not just some accident of the market, was not just some kind of inherent thing about African Americans not wanting to live in the suburbs at this time in this brand new housing that was, being made affordable to a wide range of people. It was the result of deliberate policy, both practices on the part of the federal government and state governments sort of colluding with real estate developers in order to deliberately keep African Americans out of those homes. And so when we teach American history in such a way that does not acknowledge the sort of legal barriers and policy barriers that have been put in place in order to prevent certain groups of people from being fully included in that in the American society, we set up a situation in which future generations are much more likely to, blame the victim, to think about American society only in individualistic terms.
Well, you note that some of the criticism, so didn't mean to interrupt you. Teaching of slavery, let's say, some parents opposed have said, well, it'll make my child feel, bad and responsible, but we've reported on surveys that said that most Americans, majority, feel that those topics should be taught.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this is coming from political leaders who have particular agendas about whom they see their constituencies as being, and it's not necessarily all of the voters. It is a small subset of voters, a much smaller subset than people may realize.
So, Glenda, going back to you, we are running out of time as usual. What are some of the concerns that you have right now about the education of minority children?
Some of the concerns. Look, I think that students learn in a variety of ways. And if you are, like some people say, teaching to a test all the time, you're not teaching everybody, right? And so if everybody doesn't excel at testing or they don't learn in a way that is facilitated when you're teaching for the test, then you're leaving people behind. And for me, the world we live in has so many issues, and it needs so many people on the job trying to find solutions to the issues. And where you're only educating a small percentage of people, you're only educating a small potential group of solution solver, people coming forward with solutions. And that to me is really challenging. Places like CUNY I think is really important because it helps people catch up when they're undereducated, or if they come totally prepared, there's a place for them. And if they come undereducated, there's a place for them. But that also should be happening first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. So kids can start to dream and they can start to plan. Because you're in a little better shape if you're planning from 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade as opposed to later. People are able to do it.
Better to start
no
early.
Question. But if you're able to start early.
So, Kris, going to you, are there particular concerns that you have about some of the issues surrounding the education of minority children?
Absolutely. The widening, I think, resource gap. I mean, as Glenda said, funding is critically important, but also thinking about education more comprehensively, sort of outside of the classroom and outside of the school building as well. Not only have schools been forced to take on a much wider range of responsibilities in order to try and address the needs of students outside of school, but that is not necessarily being matched outside of education funding. You know, how we are prioritizing the way that we spend our, you know, finite resources is a huge concern, and how it impacts you know, communities of lower socioeconomic background.
We also know that Black and brown children are expelled more frequently, suspended more frequently in school. They, you know, less likely to be placed in gifted and talented programs, and we have lower expectations. We are running out of time, so I want to ask you both, are there ways that we can fight systemic racism in K through 12 education, and do you have any suggestions for anti-racist policies that we should be putting into place that we don't have, or that we should build on?
That's a tough one. If I knew that, we'd be doing a show on that.
Running out of time.
I think that part of what we have to do, and this just goes back to, we also have to supplement and understand we have to educate also in addition to K through 12. So I have to get people to museums. I have to teach history. At every and again, you don't want to have to take it on, but you have to, because teachers are teaching for the test, or they have other things. And so it's important. That's not a policy; it's a practice. Understand that we all have to serve as educators and challenge people, and challenge schools, and also challenge students.
Any advice, Kris, for educators, parents watching? I
mean, certainly, you know, as a society, we need to really treat education as a right. I think, you know, perhaps it's said, but we're not passing policy or, you know, acting in that way. We have to, as Glenda said, you know, continue to think about people who learn differently, right? So that we are actually educating to all of the students in front of us as much as we can. I know that K through 12 teachers and college professors do a lot of professional development in order to become better instructors, and we just need to continue that work.
I would also say one other thing: cohort models are really important. Kris talked about that. You need to, if you're a parent, make sure your student has some folks who are walking with them, because that helps you. That helps students.
We are completely out of time. I want to thank you both for joining me today. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate Glenda Grace. I know she is retiring from CUNY, and I want to thank you so much for your service to CUNY. We will miss you. So thank you all.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of EdCast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
We'd like to hear from you. Please send your thoughts and comments to cunyedcast@gmail.com.